Hello, this is the fourth video of my traditional journey and how my traditional journey really started in earnest. So I was living in Saskatoon and I had the old man Notawi as my father and Earl as my partner and the old lady as my kokum. And a day came where I got very sick and I ended up in the hospital. While I was in the hospital, Kokum and the old man came in and visited me. But while they were in a reserve called Little Red, I think, or maybe it was another reserve around there was a buffalo jump. So during that buffalo jump, that old lady, she got that blood all over her hands, and she kept that blood on her hands for the hour and a half that she drove into Saskatoon to visit me in the hospital, and started rubbing that blood all over my body because that's healing medicine, and I was pretty sick. So the nurses came into the room and they looked at me and they said, "What's that all over you?" And she said, "That's buffalo blood." And the nurses started screaming, "Pathogens, pathogens, pathogens." And within about 20 minutes, they had me checked out. So I got into the van with the old man and the old woman, and they were taking me back to the reserve on Sturgeon Lake. So I got out there and I was pretty sick. I was staying in the hospital and I wasn't very hungry and I wasn't getting around very much. And that old lady was getting really nervous. She was scared that she was going to come into the trailer and find me dead. So she called Patty, a friend of mine. So Patty came out to see me and that old lady told her, "I'm scared I'm going to walk into that trailer and find him dead. I don't want to walk into that trailer and find him dead." So Patty took me home to her reserve in Sandy Bay, Saskatchewan, Sandy Lake, Saskatchewan, Sandy Lake Reserve. And that's where I got to know her better and her husband and her daughter, and she ended up adopting me as her brother. While I was on that reserve, I went over to see some people. They had a sweat and they invited me to that sweat, and I ended up in that sweat, and that was in my leather days and my head shaved. And when I bowed down and looked inside that sweat, the first thing on their minds was, "Holy shit, this skinhead is going to kill us in our sweat lodge." And when I looked inside that sweat, I seen a picture of the baby Jesus, rosary beads, and Mary holding the baby Jesus. And when I get in there, they started talking in tongues. So that was a different thing, but it was okay. You know, they were traditional Christians, and they found the ways in which oral tradition connected with hundreds of ways and passages within the Bible. So they followed the tradition side by side of Christianity and traditionalism. It was quite a unique situation. Anyway, as time was on, I was pretty sick. I was staying there with Patty, and I was pretty sick, so I decided to call home. I called home to my mom, and I was talking to my mom, and my mom said, "I want you to come home." I told her, I said, "You better talk to your husband, because he told me not to come back." And then she said, 1 minute, I hear the kettle boiling. I got to make my tea. So she said, I'll call you right back. So she hung up the phone, and within 20 seconds, my father was on the phone asking me to come home. I don't know what she said to him in 20 seconds, but he got on that phone and asked me to come home pretty quick. So they sent me the airfare to come home, and I went home for a couple of months. While I was home, my grandmother died. So I was glad I was able to get home because I got to spend that last little bit of time to visit my grandmother a couple of times. Who I always stayed in touch with my grandmother always when I was traveling. Even when I was in Africa, I called her from Africa. I called her, I said, "Hey, Graham." Every time I called, she recognized my voice. "Michael, how are you? I thought you were going to be in Africa." I said, "I am. I'm calling you from Africa." She said, "You're calling me from Africa? Holy. I better get off the phone because this is costing you money. Besides, I got to go around and tell everybody in the nursing home that my grandson called me from Africa." None of them ever had their grandson call them from Africa. I know that. So, so I got off the phone. She was really happy. And anyway, I always kept in touch with her. So I got to see her before she died. And I got to spend some time with my mom and some time in Halifax. And then it was time for me to go back to Saskatoon and pack up because I had decided that I'm going to move back home. So I got back to Saskatoon, and Earl met me there, and we had a really wonderful 2 weeks. We spent that whole 2 weeks together, and that relationship was full of unbridled passion. It was the Creator that put us together in order for me to meet that old man who, that old man really rekindled a relationship between me and my ancestors, through my blood memories and my DNA, and, created a relationship between myself and them that's ongoing even today. So I packed up my house and got shipped everything to Nova Scotia, and then I was on my way back home. I got home, and then it was time for me to start looking for a sweat. That old man had put prayers in place for me to be able to find the right sweat lodge. So I ended up meeting a friend of mine. It was a Lakota lodge and Mi'kmaq lodge at the same time. It was a lodge with two doors. One opened to the west for Lakota sweats, and the other door opened to the east for Mi'kmaq sweats. And this is the way I still follow today when I get sick. I go to the Lakota lodge for healing. And when I carry my pipe and I do fasting and things like that, I do that in the Mi'kmaq ways. And I was very glad to be home. 9 months after I got home, my mother died. That was a really hard thing, losing my mom. Within 1 year period, my grandmother died and my mother died. That was her mother. And that's when, after my mother died, that's when I went out and fasted for the first time with other people. Before that, I did a walking fast. But that was the first time I went up on the mountain, and that's going up on the mountain. That's when I met Joe John. And I asked that old man for help while I was fasting. He looked at me and said, "Why are you fasting?" I said, "I gotta fast for my mom, for her, for a good trip to the spirit world." Well, my mom came and spent time with me during that fast. And then every time I fasted after that, she came and spent that time with me. Until I fasted at a bear feast where I was told I had to let her go, so I let her go, and then after that she didn't visit me anymore. But that was 6 fasts that she was there to spend that time with me. So every time I went out to fast, I really looked forward to it, and I really had a good time when I was fasting because I knew my mom was going to be there to spend time with me. I mean, what kind of a privilege is that to be able to spend time with your mom after she has passed on to the spirit world? I was so lucky. But that was where the spiritual journey led me. You know, while I was just after my mom died, my godmother came up to me and she said, "You know, your mom came to me and she said that these last few months that you've been here were the best times that she's ever spent with you in her life." My mom was really happy that I found a spirituality that I could connect with. My mother was a Christian. She was a Christian woman, Anglican woman. You know, she used to go up into the church and pray for how to run the program that she ran. She ran a program for ex-offenders. She hired people right in the prison, right on the ranges in the prisons. And she'd hire them to come and work for her. You know, that's what she used to do. So I was home and now my mom was gone. It was a hard time. It was a very hard time, and a hard time finding a place to live, and a hard time getting all that stuff figured out. And that winter was very difficult because, you know, I was couch surfing a lot of times during that winter. You know, sometimes I didn't really have any place to stay because my mom had moved to Pictou and I was living in Halifax. You know, and it was hard times. But then I found a place to live in the south end of Halifax. And that's when I met my partner that I'm with, the person that I'm with now, Michael. That's when I met him, and you know, we became best friends. And we've been really good friends and living together now for the past 27 years. So this is the person who takes care of me now, looks after me in a good way, and that's pretty much how my spiritual journey went. I continued to fast. I still fast, and I'm looking forward to doing another fast maybe this spring. And, you know, working on these projects like my ancestors have really been encouraging me to work on this 9 genders work. And this is where all this is leading. I'm doing these videos so that people can get to know who I am and where I'm coming from, where my spiritual connection is coming from, because I'll be offering coaching services to people, to parents with gender diverse children. Me, myself, I'm non-binary. So I'd like to work with these parents to be able to create safer spaces for these kids to be able to live in. Also, as I've been living here in Halifax, I went back to school and achieved my Bachelor of Social Work. So this is where I am now. This has been my traditional journey. My traditional journey continues. I carry a very special pipe, you know, a big drum and an old grandfather turtle rattle, and have all these traditional things around me to help me progress along my spiritual journey. And this is where I'd like to be able to share with other people through coaching services, to be able to help them to explore their traditional ancestral journey. You know, this traditional ancestralism is a very big part of my life and goes back to my roots with the Beothuk Nation and as a Jackatar and even further back to Ireland where there was lots of Norse ancestry and Norse traditions combined with Irish traditions, and some of those Irish traditions are the oldest traditional ways in ancestralism that are still being practiced in Ireland. So I'm very fortunate to have this coming in so many directions. Also, my father's grandmother was the medicine woman in Stephenville Crossing. So medicine comes from her down through the lines, and that enables to be able to make a little bit of medicine here and there to maybe help myself out a little bit or help somebody else out a little bit. But that's about it. Thank you for listening.